So let's talk about the land of Punt once again. But first, what we have to do is look at this map. This map here gives us a distribution of the Cushitic languages. Why is this important? Well, the Cushitic languages seem to be at least stuck in the eastern or the horn of Africa. But we know that the Beja also speak a Cushitic language, and the Beja are located in Egypt. And we also know that the Beja, through DNA and other things, are native at least 4000 BC in ancient Egypt, which means the people of Punt have a connection with a people who spoke the same language as them, are genetically related to them, and have also got some, let's say, drawings that have been alleged by historians to represent the Beja. So you're going to need to remember this when we talk about the fact that the land of Punt is going to be explored about 2000 BC. There are some mentions of the Punt people going back to about 3000 BC, but they don't need any real recital as the information is scarce and sometimes the words can be thought of as different than what we think they mean. The first real evidence that we have that is highly detailed comes from Mentuhotep III's time. During Mentuhotep III's time, which is 2000 BC, we start to see real Punt writings. Now, to show you a difference here, the Hatshepsut writing is about 1400 BC in the later period, so 1450 BC onwards. And remember, the higher the number, the longer ago it was, the lower the number, the closer it is to our time. So by the time of Mentuhotep III, we're talking about 400 years prior to the previous trip that we were investigating. 400 years prior to that date. Imagine what has changed in Ethiopia at the time. Ethiopia being that entire horn of Africa in this reference. On reading the achievements of Mentuhotep II, he seemed like he left no room for improvement, that he made so many great uniting achievements going as far as Asia and Nubia that you couldn't even think that someone could top him. But of course, it happened. Mentuhotep III sent a large expedition to the land of Punt, 3,000 men, as it said, which were first accompanied by a 10,000 that stopped on the hills of Nubia. So the first 10,000 stopped at the hill of Nubia, and then a further 3,000 made it all the way to Punt. When they got to Punt, they gathered many objects and many items and then brought them back. And this is 2000 BC. Keep that in mind. And so, what we're about to read is the text written by Henu, which, by the way, Henu was not a one trick pony. He actually did a lot of things, but we're going to focus right now on what he did in Punt. Now, this is what he wrote in his autobiography detailing his trip to Punt. He also has other writings that detail his trip back from Punt, which we will look at later. My Lord sent me forth to dispatch ships to Punt, to bring back for him fresh incense from the rulers dwelling in the Red Land. For of him pervading the uplands thereupon, I went up from Coptus upon the road which his majesty had commanded me to take, I being accompanied by a force of Upper Egypt from Webel, of the Theban nome from Imoteru to Shabat. The text goes on and describes the personnel and the outfitting of 3,000 men. Now I made 12 wells on the valley floor, and 2 wells in Edet, one measuring 20 cubits, the other 30. I made another in Ebit, in Ehib, of 10 by 10 cubits at all water levels. Then I reached the Wadir, and then I built this fleet. I loaded it with everything. When I had made for it a great sacrifice of cattle and goats, When I returned from the Whittier, I had done that which His Majesty had commanded me to do, bringing back for him all sorts of produce that I had found on the shores of the God's land, to nature. I descended from Weg, an unidentified place, and Rehenu, the Egyptian name for Wadi Hamamat, bringing for him precious stone blocks for the temple statues. Now, this thing here that is actually written in Wadi Hamamat itself. Okay, so that's the dry reading, but now let's start to break down exactly what he's talking about. So he says, "My Lord sent me forth to dispatch ships to Punt to bring back for him fresh incense." Let's stop there. So you see here that we are seeing the same substance that is being talked about by Hatshepsut at least 500 years later, in the sense of frankincense and stuff like that, being talked about in this same place. So it is not talking about a different place. They haven't been mistaken. They're not thinking of a place that is different. They're thinking about the exact same punt that was mentioned earlier. And if we read again, "My Lord sent me," the Lord, of course, being Mentuhotep III, "sent me forth to dispatch ships to Punt to bring back for him fresh incense from the rulers dwelling in the Red Land." From the rulers dwelling in the Red Land. This, of course, mentioning the deserty areas. Fear of him pervading the uplands thereupon. I went up from Coptus, as you can see there's Coptus written over there on the map if you look. And then, of course, there's Wadi Hamamat on the line. If you look at the line to Kasir, you will see that there's Wadi Hamamat right in the middle. So let's read again. "I went up from Coptus upon the road which His Majesty had commanded me to take." Now let's break down that second paragraph. So we've already gone past the punt and fresh incense. So he says later, "From the rulers dwelling in the Red Land," as you can see on the map that I put on the side, pointing, the rulers of the Red Land, we talk about the Eastern Desert here. So the Eastern Desert is what he's trying to avoid next to the Red Sea. And you can see he says, "Fear of him pervading the uplands thereupon." So he had fear of the lands that were in this area. Well, basically, he says Mentuhotep had fear of the people of the Eastern Desert because obviously they might be treacherous. This means he's not fully stable of the control of those people. And then he carries on to say, which is a great insight, considering that he didn't need to put that in. And then he says, "Thereupon I went up from Coptus upon the road which His Majesty had commanded me to take." So if you break that down, you can see that he was told to travel through the Nile, avoid the red lands. Remember, Kem, meaning the black lands. So he avoided the black lands. He avoided the red lands and traveled through the black lands, meaning he traveled through the Nile and landed in Coptus. And as you can see, where I zoomed in was Coptus, and the map on the other side shows Coptus zoomed in, but I wanted you to see exactly where it is. It's very it's in Upper Egypt, and in Upper Egypt he starts to explain, "I being accompanied by a force of Upper Egypt." So let's pause right there. So he says that he is being accompanied by a force of Upper Egypt. So clearly, the person is in charge of the Upper Egyptians at this time, just not the people of the Redlands, at least not all the people of the Redlands. And you can see there where he says, "I took a force." This force is not small, by the way, as we will read, "of Upper Egypt, from the Wubu, of the Theban nome of Imioteru to Shabbat." Now let's think about who these Wubu are. Well, these Wubu are located in the regions where we would call them Beja regions. It's possible that the people that he took from Upper Egypt are the ancestors of the today Beja. So it's possible that the Wubu is just another name for the Beja today of Upper Egypt. Now, I want to state that the word Wubu is not a tribe name, it's a place name. It's a place name, not a tribe name. But we don't know exactly where it's located. We do know that it's a place, and we know it's in this region, but we don't know exactly where it's located. Of the Theban nome, from Imyoteru to Shabet. The text goes on to describe the personnel and outfitting of the 3,000 men. So 3,000 men are taken from Upper Egypt. So these are like Nubian type people, possibly Beja, speaking a Cushitic language, which would make sense because if they speak a Cushitic language, they could go with him to Punt and immediately translate the language. If we take this into consideration, let's just break this down for a second. So as we can see here, the Beja, which are probably called the Blemis by the Greeks, are located in this region, and you can see there that they speak an Afro-Asiatic, Cushitic, North Cushitic Beja, which means that they could possibly communicate with the people of what do you call that? They could communicate with the people of Punt because the people of Punt, again, according to linguists, spoke a Cushitic language, Southern Cushitic language. This could be the difference between just traveling there for no reason and traveling there and understanding that the people there are ancient and can speak the same language as people in Upper Egypt, and it might have given them the impression that these were the descendants. And another thing to look at, and we've talked about these type of Sudanic type of people, is the fact that the Beja are also accused, and it's probably true, of being the Medjay, part of the Medjay at least. So these Nubians that were marshaled on the side of Egypt, on the desert parts of Egypt, to guard that area against, you know, rebel forces of Nubian tribes and stuff like that. So they're Nubians who are sent by Egyptians to go guard other Nubians who live in the Red Lands in the Eastern Desert, to guard those people so that they don't, get out of line. So why am I telling you this? Well, it tells you that there might actually be something to the thought that the people of Punt are the ancestors of the people of Egypt, because there is a direct connection linguistically, geographically, pottery wise, and stuff like that. But we're not going to talk about that just yet. And also the Pangrave people, and even that writing of that man, the Nubian, the Nahesi, even that guy might represent that giant expansion of the Cushitic languages. This is important because, like I said, they will further travel south. They will further travel south and back and forth. And it's possible that this travel back and forth left some Egyptians in those regions speaking the language. And remember what I said earlier, the Cushitic languages was a minority language in Egypt, and we can prove that. So let's carry on with his reading. I, being accompanied by a force of Upper Egypt from the Wubu of the Theban nome from Imyoteru to Shabbat or Shabet. The text goes on to describe the personnel and outfitting of 3,000 men. Now I made 12 wells on the valley floor, and 2 wells in Edet, one measuring 20 cubits, the other 30. I made another in Ehitib of 10 by 10 cubits at all water levels. Then I reached the Wad War, and then I built this fleet. I loaded it with everything when I had made for a great sacrifice of cattle and goats. When I returned from the Wad War, I had done that which His Majesty had commanded me to do, bringing back for him all sorts of produce that I had found on the shores of the God's land. So he's already reached the shores, he's already landed there, and he's bringing back different types of foods and incense, as he was promised, the same incense that we'll see being brought back by Amenhotep, being brought back by hatshepsut, being brought back by Ramses III, who also genetically has been tested as a African man. And we will see that yes, this writing is there. I descended from Hekwa, an unidentified place, and of Rehenu, the Egyptian name for Wadi Hamamat, bringing for him precious stone blocks for the temple statues. So you can see here, even though there's a lot to learn in general about who these people were and how they traveled, and there's a reason why I had to bring the Cushitic thing in here, because he's his input is so little when it comes to actually landing in Punt. And also he says that he stayed by the shores. He doesn't talk about going inland. He stayed by the shores. Bringing 3,000 people and only staying by the shores of Punt is crazy. But it also tells us that he's not. So when you hear people say he went to Oman or he went to. Nah, he did not go that far. Also, he traveled by land, as you can see. Like he was hopping from one piece of land to the next. So Wediwar is one of the lands. Then Hakur is another part of the land. Ebet is another part of the land. Ehitib is another land. So he's land hopping as he travels, meaning he's traveling through one continent. He's not jumping over the Red Sea. He would have stated, I mean, they had a name for the Red Sea. Sadly, in Egypt, there's usually no follow up. Usually, there's nothing to carry on the story. You just have to sort of build the story yourself. And we could talk about Blemis, we could talk about Kushites, we could talk about the language. But exactly why would someone send someone to Punt? What is the deep excursion need to go all the way to Punt to go fetch these things? Why not burn something else? Why not use something else? I'm sure there were perfumes from Asia. I'm sure there were perfumes from Libya. Why this specific place? And also, where is the follow up? Okay, so you brought them back. Now what? Now, of course, we can see that the ancient Egyptians and the Upper Egyptians have some similarities based on the writings, the animal sacrifice that he did. That animal sacrifice, by the way, is less common with lower Egyptians. You see it way more with upper Egyptians, as I've shown you with those pan graves, as I've shown you with the Nubian king that killed 5,000 cattle after, well, he didn't do the slaughtering, but a bunch of people did it for him after he died, and there was 5,000 cattle by his grave. And so part of that slaying might be a tribute to the Nubian people. But let's think about it. This person, Mentuhotep III, might be Nubian himself. It might not be something that is foreign to him. It might be something that is he's accustomed to. So let's see if we can find details of both what happened after this journey and then also what happened to the Puntites when they left, when the Egyptians left. Now remember, the age is 2000 BC. All we need is information about what was happening in Ethiopia in 2000 BC. So we have an inscription from ancient Egypt from Wadi Hamamat. So I will first give it a cold read or a dry read so that we can get a taste of what it is, then I'll explain it like I did last time. So it says, second month, year two, second month of the season of inundation, day 15. Horus, Lord of the two lands, two ladies, Lord of the two lands, God of gold, the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, son of Ra, Mentuhotep. May he live forever. His Majesty commanded the erection of this stele for his father Min, Lord of the foreign lands, on this august mountain, primordial one, foremost in the land of the horizon dwellers, divine palace endowed with life, divine nest of Horus in which this god flourishes, his pure place of enjoyment above the countries of the god's land, in order to satisfy his spirit and to honor the god as he desires, as does a king who is on the great throne, foremost, enduring of monuments, excellent God, Lord of joy, much feared, greatly loved, heir of Horus in his two lands, reared by divine Isis, mother of men, and Weret Hekau, for the kingship of the two banks of Horus, the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Nebtuare, may he live Ra forever, says Majesty sent the Prince Regent, leader of the city, vizier, overseer of works, royal confidant Amenemhet, together with an expedition of 10,000 men from the southern provinces of Upper Egypt and from south of Wabut, to bring me a precious block of pure stone of this mountain, whose excellence was made by men, for a sarcophagus of an eternal memorial, and for monuments in the temple of Upper Egypt, as a mission of the king, chief of two lands, to bring the heart's desire from the lands of his father Min. He created it as his monument for his father Min of Coptus, lord of the foreign lands, chief of the troglodytes, that may be given very much life, and live like Ra forever. Day 27. The lid of the sarcophagus descended, a block of 4 cubits by 8 cubits by 2 cubits, as it came from the works. Calves were slaughtered, goats were sacrificed, incense was put on the fire. An expedition of 3,000 sailors from the provinces of Lower Egypt conducted it safely to Egypt. So if you can tell here, there's already many clues leading up to the Puntites, with the 3,000 men and the incense and all of that. That information tells us that we are dealing with a time that the Punt mission has been restated. In other words, we have a follow-up. But how can we have a follow-up? Let's look at the first one. We know we know that the mission to Punt by Mentuhotep III was in his 8th year, and this is in the 2nd year. So what does this mean? Well, it means that this is Mentuhotep IV. This is the next king. And how do I know that it's the next king? Well, there's a clue on the next page before we go back and read it. This is why it's important to pay attention. So if you look there, the name Nebtuawire is the pharaoh name for Mentuhotep IV, as you can see. So this journey by Mentuhotep's people in his reign made it past his death. It was such a big event that it was documented after he had died and the next pharaoh had taken over. 2045 BCE to about 1985 BCE. That's the reign of Mentuhotep IV. So this that we're reading right here is not Mentuhotep III. This is afterwards, meaning it's a follow-up, but years later. So now we can revisit it. Year 2, second month of the season of inundation, day 15. Horus, Lord of the Two Lands, Two Ladies, Lord of the Two Lands, Gods of Gold, the King of Upper and Lower Egypt, Nebtueri Tuire, son of Re, Mentuhotep, may he live forever. His Majesty commanded the erection of this stele for his father Min, lord of the foreign lands, on this august mountain, primordial one. Now, it may seem like I'm just rereading it, but yet there's not that many clues here about what exactly we're going into. And of course, I've already said that Nebtwa shows that this is Mentuhotep the fourth that we're dealing with. The way we separate it by calling him the fourth or whatever was not necessary in ancient Egypt because of course they had other names. It's almost like having a last name or something. They had like four or five different names, so you can always tell which one they're talking about. By the way, this is the god Min, and he is the one who's being explained as the god of the foreign lands. I will let you guess why this person is being associated with the eastern lands of East Africa. Now, again, we need to get to the clues that will tell us exactly what place we're talking about. But I think we'll reach a sentence that will put the nail on the coffin of exactly where we're talking about, exactly which place in the world we're talking about, and how it got there. Of course, some of you have already noticed that they talked about 3,000 people and they talked about incense, but we haven't gotten there yet. For the father Min, lord of the foreign lands, on this august mountain, primordial one, foremost in the land of the horizon dwellers. So already you're seeing here a indication of what he's talking about. So primordial one, meaning the god of that land, foremost in the land of the horizon dwellers, meaning that these people sprang out from men, divine palace endowed with life. There you go. Divine nest of Horus, in which this god flourishes. And keep in mind, we're going to talk about it later, but Horus was worshipped in Ethiopia even after the Christian era, but we'll get back to that. His pure place of enjoyment above the countries of God's land. Okay, let's go back a bit. This is the part that I wanted to get to. So we'll read it one more time. Foremost in the land of the horizon dwellers, divine palace endowed with life, divine nest of Horus in which this god flourishes, his pure place of enjoyment above the countries of the god's land. Now keep that in mind. The place that he's talking about, that is the countries of Min, is the Sudanese regions, the borderlands, the lands that border Egypt, as they're right there, the horizon dwellers, the people who dwell on the horizon. And we know that he's talking about outside of their domain because he says Lord of the foreign lands. And then, of course, he mentions Horus. But the part that's important is these countries are above God's land. God's land, of course, being the land of Punt, to nature. As you can see, it's written in the original, well, not the original Egyptian, but the translation, the transliteration. So you see there, to nature, which is not how you would say it, but let's say it that way. To nature, God's land. So above the land of Punt. So they're saying you don't have to sail a sea or nothing, just above the land of the horizon dwellers. That's where you're gonna find the people in Punt. Now, you might think to yourself, isn't above Egypt? Well, we have to remember that the map was upside down, up was down, and down was up. And so that's how you get to it being above rather than below. In order to satisfy his spirit and to honor the god as he desires, as does a king who is on the great throne, foremost enduring of the monuments, excellent God, Lord of joy, much feared, greatly loved, heir of Horus in the two lands, reared by divine Isis, mother of Min, and Weret Hekau. Sorry for speeding past some of the others, but we're not doing a story on the gods. We're doing it on Punt, so let's focus on Punt. For the kingship of the banks of Horus, the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, Nibtwar Wire, may he live like Ra forever, says my majesty sent the prince regent, leader of the city, vizier of overseer of works, royal confidant Amenemhat, together with an expedition of 10,000 men. So you see here, together with a mission of 10,000 men, started with 10,000 men from the southern province of Upper Egypt and from the south of Werebut, to bring me a precious block of pure stone of this mountain. So, in other words, a trip was sent with 10,000 people to bring him a stone from this mountain, whose excellence was made by men for a sarcophagus of an eternal memorial. I think that's self explanatory. And for monuments in the temples of Upper Egypt as a mission of the king, chief of the two lands, bring him his heart's desire from the lands of his father Min. So you can see here that when they're talking about Upper Egypt, this foreign land that they're talking about, the land of Min, is different than Upper Egypt, as you can tell. He created it at his monument for his father Min of Coptus, lord of the foreign lands, chief of the troglodytes. Let's stop there. These troglodytes would be those same people that they were trying to avoid. So troglodytes are Nubians who live in caves, as we have discussed when Herodotus talks about them. They live in caves, and these Nubians are foreigners inside Egypt. Some of them live high up inside of Egypt. And you can see there where he says, Lord of the foreign lands, chief of the troglodytes, that he may be given very much life. So far, there's too many clues about the fact that they're talking about the Nubian regions, they're talking about Punt in the word God's land, but there is still one more. And of course, there's that mission of the 10,000 people. And of course, if you weren't convinced by the fact that they've already mentioned or basically given us direction and given us a God who shows what type of people these people would be, which is why they're giving him to men, then we could continue to read this last piece. And live like Ra forever. Day 27, the lid of the sarcophagus descends, a block of 4 cubits by 8 cubits by 2 cubits, as it came from the works. Calves were slaughtered, goats were sacrificed, incense, this incense is from, you'll see, put on fire. An expedition of 3,000 sailors from the provinces of Lower Egypt conducted it safely to Egypt. So something here that is being talked about that I think is being missed a little bit is a lot of this is about the funeral of Mentuhotep II, but it's more about the coronation, but it's not the coronation because it's already in year 2, but it's more about the coronation of this person. So you can see how they're mixing two things together here. They're talking about, and they do this sometimes, they consider themselves the same as the king that came before. So they do talk about the other person, their father, as if they are the father and the son are one of the same. So let's read again. It says, calves were slaughtered, goats were sacrificed, incense was put on the fire. An expedition of 3,000 sailors from the province of Lower Egypt conducted it safely to Egypt. So again, the people who went to God's land as we read before. There was 3,000 of them. They went, he said, I went and fetched some precious stones for you in the God's land. And this mission is being recounted here, and they're being used for a sarcophagus. Well, at least the lid of a sarcophagus in this case. So you can see here that there's a recount of the same information that existed prior, but of course, it shows you that the missions did not stop. The road to Punt did not stop during Amenhotep the Fourth's reign. I don't have any good pictures of Mentuhotep the Fourth, so I'll just use this one of the previous Mentuhotep. But I want to say something. There's something else that happened, and it might be as a result of this trip to Punt, because Mentuhotep the Fourth, right? So let's first go to Mentuhotep the Third. Mentuhotep the Third sent Henu to Punt, right? He sent Henu, and Henu came back, celebration, dot dot dot. Mentuhotep the Fourth sent Amenemhat to Punt, and guess who ended up on the throne? It seems as if Amenemhat, the person who went to Punt for the pharaoh, didn't exactly like being the runner for the pharaoh, and so he would take over after Mentuhotep took over, and with a possible assassination. So in this one, in the 10,000 expedition, Amenemhat traveled to Punt, and in the last one, in the recounting of the last one, in the last page, they recounted how in that happened in the previous. That's the follow up from the previous. So you can see here that the leader of the city, vizier, overseer of works, royal confidant Amenemhat, together with an expedition of 10,000 men, how he went to Punt. And of course, he was the prince regent, he was the next in line. But again, he must have not felt very satisfied with his position, because there is a possible assassination to get to the throne quicker. And perhaps maybe even Nebtuawire or Nebtuawara, if that name is Ra, if he sensed that there might have been trouble, maybe that's why he sent the prince away so far away. So even though there were two missions, we can see here that the same places and the same things are taking place. Min, Coptus. We will need to draw a map later of which parts still belong to the Nubians and which part belong to the Egyptians, because they always seem to share Egypt. So we read from Wikipedia, it is assumed by some Egyptologists that Amenemhat either usurped the throne or assumed power after Mentuhotep the Fourth died childless. There is currently no archaeological or textual evidence to prove that Mentuhotep was deposed by his vizier, or that he chose Amenemhat to be his designated successor. Perhaps either situation is possible, or another unknown one is nobody truly knows how Amenemhat the First rose to the throne. Neither his mummy nor his burial place have been found. Okay, so let's talk about something. Amenemhat seems to have usurped the throne to me. It seems obvious, and I can tell why they assume it. But let's first read something that I disagree with Wikipedia. The text clearly says that he's the prince regent. Regent meaning co-ruler of Egypt. Prince meaning next in line, if possible. It's possible that Mentuhotep maybe couldn't have children, and that he put someone who definitely, like a vizier, to be the next in line. And remember, it's not the first time that a vizier of Nubia would take over. That's what happened in the case of Ramses after Akhenaten. But the reason why some of them say this is because he died too early and he died childless and all of that. Now, it all depends what the circumstance is, but it's possible that he assassinated him. And why would it go to him anyway? Why would the power go to this person and not some other relative? So I'll finish by saying this, since we're already talking about the God's land. The job of the Pharaoh is to bring order amongst the chaos. And Mentuhotep the first had done this, or the second had done this. Mentuhotep the third maintained the power. Mentuhotep the fourth broke the dynasty, and Amenemhat was throwing Egypt back into chaos. I want to explore a video about exactly what was happening in 2000 BC in Ethiopia so that we can have a clue exactly what these people would have run into. And of course, where exactly were they quarrying these stones from? These precious stones. Because if you don't just cut stones and then leave, somewhere there's got to be a hole where they put the sarcophagus stone, where they pulled it out from. And maybe we'll find it, maybe we won't. Now, we will be looking at stuff like this, and as you can see, there's a lot of similarities between this pottery found in Lake Tana in Ethiopia and the pottery that you see in the Nubian regions.